In the 10th year of King Gwanghaegun's reign, a man was executed in the western marketplace of Seoul. He was one of the most brilliant writers of Joseon, and also one of its most controversial thinkers. His name was Heo Gyun. 3 days earlier, on the morning of August 10th, 1618, after a night of rain, as the darkness slowly lifted over the capital, a single poster appeared on the wall of Namdaemun Gate. It read,
"Punish the tyrant king. The great general from the south is coming."
The message sounded like a declaration of rebellion. The investigation soon revealed that the poster had been put up by Hyun Un-min, a close associate of Heo Gyun. And inevitably, the blade of power turned toward him. Yet the incident left many questions. If there truly had been a conspiracy, why would it be announced publicly on a city wall? In Joseon politics, such posters were sometimes used as weapons in factional struggles. And in this case, no decisive evidence ever emerged that Heo Gyun had actually planned a rebellion. The political atmosphere of the time was already dangerously tense. The court was divided over the controversy surrounding Queen Dowager Inmok and Prince Yongchang. The king himself had been born to a royal concubine, which left lingering questions about his legitimacy, while the young prince, though still a child, was the son of the queen and therefore carried the title of a grand prince of the royal line. Inside the ruling faction itself, power struggles were fierce. At the same time, conflicts between the Ming dynasty and the rising Manchu state were escalating. In such an atmosphere, even a small incident could quickly become a charge of treason. But this case was unusual. Rebellion cases usually involved large networks of conspirators. This one did not. The execution was carried out only 3 days after the investigation began. There was no extended interrogation, no large-scale investigation. The process moved with remarkable speed, almost as if the verdict had come first and the investigation later. Even today, historians remain divided. Some believe the conspiracy was real. Others argue that the incident was used to eliminate a political rival. At the time, petitions demanding Heo Gyun's impeachment were already flooding the court. The famous description of him as a monstrous figure under heaven did not originally come from a historian's judgment, but from the political language of those petitions. A memorial submitted to the throne declared,
Heo Gyun is a monstrous figure under heaven. His crimes are such that no loyal subject could live under the same sky with him. Even tearing his body apart would not be punishment enough.
For a royal chronicle, such language seems strikingly emotional. But this was not the only view of Heo Gyun. Even the same records acknowledge something else about him.
He possessed an exceptionally sharp mind, read widely, and wrote with extraordinary brilliance.
Even the late king himself recognized his talent. Not long after passing the civil service examination, the young scholar was entrusted with diplomatic missions. His reputation as a writer had already spread widely at court, and it did not stop there. A Ming dynasty scholar once wrote,
"Among the writers of Joseon, Heo Gyun stands above the rest."
Yet in Joseon politics, this brilliant man would come to be remembered by a very different name. The phrase, "a monstrous figure under heaven," was another way contemporaries described him. Even those who acknowledged his extraordinary talent often added a harsh judgment.
His writing was unparalleled, but his character was frivolous and reckless.
Such conflicting evaluations appear in an anecdote recorded in Yu Mong-in's collection of tales, Eo Yadam. When Heo Gyun was 9 years old, he wrote a poem that amazed the adults around him. They predicted that he would one day become a great writer. But his brother-in-law Chu Yon made a different remark.
This boy will surely make his name through literature. But he will also be the one who overturns the house of Heo.
Heo Gyun was born in 1569 into one of the most distinguished families of Joseon. His father, Heo Yop, was a leading figure of the Eastern faction and a disciple of the great Confucian scholar Yi Huang. His two elder brothers, both known for their literary brilliance, had also entered government service early and gained considerable reputation at court. His elder sister was the celebrated poet Heo Nansolheon. The family was so renowned for its literary brilliance that people spoke of them as the 5 literary masters of the Heo clan. In his youth, Heo Gyun studied poetry under the famous poet Yi Dal, and later became a disciple of Ryu Seong-ryong, who had served as chief state counselor. Even the renowned monk Samyong Desa was among his teachers. His literary talent was recognized early. He passed the civil service examination at a relatively young age and entered government service. Yet his life was far from smooth. He openly criticized the rigid hierarchy of the Yangban elite and freely associated with people of lower status, including the sons of concubines. Such behavior was difficult for the Neo-Confucian order of Joseon to tolerate. When King Gwanghaegun ascended the throne in 1608, the political balance of the court began to shift dramatically. In 1613, the Gyeochuk Purge further transformed the structure of power. Kim Jae-nam, the father of Queen Inmok, was executed on charges of treason, and the dominant political authority soon fell into the hands of the Greater Northern faction. During this turbulent period, the most powerful figure to emerge was Yi Ichom. Heo Gyun, who had grown close to the Greater Northerners, gradually gained influence within the court as well. One of the greatest political conflicts of Gwanghaegun's reign concerned Queen Inmok. In 1617, the court debated whether the Queen Dowager should be formally deposed. Heo Gyun is known to have taken a strong position in support of this proposal. But this stance provoked fierce resentment. Although he had once been politically close to Yi Chom, their relationship later deteriorated as court rivalries intensified, particularly after Yi Chom began to see Heo Gyun as a potential rival in the struggle for influence surrounding the crown prince. Even within the Greater Northern faction itself, competition for power intensified. Gradually, Heo Gyun began to find himself increasingly isolated. By the final years of Gwanghaegun's rule, the political atmosphere in the court had become extremely tense. Within the northern faction, fierce struggles continued between the Greater Northerners and the Lesser Northerners. At the center of these conflicts were figures such as Gi Ja-hyun and his son Gi Jun-gyok. Heo Gyun, who had strongly advocated the deposition of Queen Inmok, came into direct conflict with Gi Ja-hyun, who opposed the policy. When Gi Ja-hyun was later exiled, his son Gi Jun-gyok suspected that Heo Gyun had been behind the decision. From that moment, he began repeatedly submitting memorials accusing Heo Gyun of plotting treason. The accusations did not stop there. The Office of Censors and the Office of the Inspector General also continued to submit impeachment petitions. Yet King Gwanghaegun did not easily accept these charges. Then, suddenly, a mysterious incident occurred. A treasonous placard was discovered posted on the south gate of the capital, Namdaemun. Only then did the king order that the placard incident and Gi Jun-gyok's accusations be investigated together. From that moment, the case expanded with astonishing speed. Heo Gyun was interrogated under torture at the state tribunal, Uigeumbu. He defended himself and insisted that the accusations against him, both before and after the placard incident, were false. But the investigation reached its conclusion with remarkable speed. There was no prolonged interrogation to fully establish the charges, nor was there a thorough investigation of accomplices. Even some officials in the court questioned the rapid execution of the sentence. Yet Yi Yichom strongly insisted on Heo Gyun's guilt, emphasizing that the execution was justified. The controversy quickly subsided. In the end, Heo Gyun was executed together with his close associates. Technically, the punishment was gyoyol, a brutal execution in which the condemned was torn apart by 4 horses, pulling the limbs in opposite directions. Although it was commonly referred to as ling chi, the death by 1,000 cuts, this form of execution was not actually practiced in Joseon. Just before his execution, Heo Gyun shouted that he had something to say, but he was ignored. Only 3 days had passed since the investigation of the placard incident had begun. In the annals of King Gwanghaegun, the event is recorded in a single line.
The traitor Heo Gyun, together with Ha In-soo, Hyun Eung-min, Woo Gyung-bang, and Kim Yun-hwang, was executed at the Western Market.
In the annals, the event appears as a single line. But behind that brief record was a death so violent that no body could be properly buried. Only centuries later, in the 20th century, was a symbolic grave finally established. Even the process leading to his death was strikingly opaque. Some of the men accused of posting the placards insisted during interrogation that Heo Gyun had nothing to do with it. Their statements were ignored. There is even a record suggesting that the execution was carried out too hastily. The words came from Gi Ja-hyun, who had become Heo Gyun's political enemy. Yet the remark carries a certain persuasive weight.
The confessions had not been completed, and the final judgment had not been reached. Yet the execution was carried out in haste. Surely there will be controversy in the future.
Thus, the case recorded as a treason conspiracy ended with the execution of Heo Gyun and his followers. But throughout the Joseon dynasty, the case was never reopened. No official rehabilitation ever followed. Perhaps his death had been unjust, but once someone had been branded a traitor, restoration was almost impossible. Yet the questions surrounding the incident have never entirely disappeared. Why was the placard posted at Namdaemun? Joseon history knew many men accused of treason. Most were later rehabilitated. But 2 figures remain condemned even today: Jong Yo-rip and Heo Gyun. Why did Joseon never forgive him? There were many reasons why the Neo-Confucian order could not tolerate him. From an early age, he argued against the rigid discrimination between legitimate sons and the sons of concubines. He advocated the recruitment of talented people regardless of birth. The revolutionary ideas expressed in the novel The Tale of Hong Gildong were not mere fiction. The Tale of Hong Gildong, often regarded as the first major novel written in Hangul, the native Korean alphabet, at a time when classical Chinese dominated official writing, remains one of the most famous stories in Korean literature and has inspired many films and television dramas in modern times.
In the story, Hong Gildong is the illegitimate son of a nobleman who cannot even call his own father. Refusing to accept the rigid hierarchy of birth, he leaves home and gathers followers who share his resentment against injustice. Together, they form a band that challenges corrupt officials and the social order itself. Like a legendary outlaw, he and his band raid corrupt officials and wealthy oppressors, redistributing their wealth among the poor. In the end, Hong Gildong establishes a new kingdom where ability, not birth, determines a person's place.
Heo Gyun also openly showed sympathy for Buddhism, something unacceptable in a Confucian state. In his essay, On the People, Hominron, he argued that the people were the true foundation of political authority.
The only thing under heaven that rulers should truly fear is the people. What heaven sees is what the people see. What heaven hears is what the people hear.
Yet the criticisms of Heo Gyun were not entirely groundless. Though praised as a literary genius, he frequently became the subject of gossip for his unconventional behavior. He associated freely with courtesans such as Mei Chang, a celebrated poet courtesan, and sometimes even brought entertainers with him to official postings. He was repeatedly dismissed and reinstated in government service. Most controversial of all was his support for the deposition of Queen Inmok. In a Confucian society where filial piety was considered the highest virtue, this was an act many could not forgive. Even so, could such a man truly deserve to be remembered for centuries as a monstrous figure under heaven? One thing, however, seems certain. Despite all the criticism, Heo Gyun was not a coward. When he was accused of treason, friends urged him to flee. He refused. Instead, he first moved his writings, including his own collected works and the poems of his sister Heo Nansolhyeon, to his daughter's house. The next day, he was arrested. He chose to preserve his writings before preserving his own life. Heo Gyun also never concealed the things that the Confucian elite of his time regarded as taboo. His friendships with men of humble birth, his relationships with courtesans, and his exchanges with Buddhist monks. Perhaps the most revealing remark he left behind concerns human desire.
The desires of men and women are given by heaven, while moral rules are taught by sages. Heaven stands above the sages. Therefore, I would rather violate moral rules than go against heaven.
In a society governed by Neo-Confucian orthodoxy, there was little space for a man who lived as freely as Heo Gyun did. For this reason, it may be too simple to dismiss him merely as an opportunist who sided with power. The standards used to select officials in Joseon valued appearance, speech, calligraphy, and judgment. A man of such unconventional temperament would hardly fit them. Yet it is equally difficult to deny that Joseon society itself lacked the tolerance to embrace such a brilliant and unconventional figure. When the Ming envoy, Zhu Jifan, compiled selected poems of Joseon, the person who helped him choose the poems was none other than Heo Gyun. He recited the poems of Joseon from memory. They were written down and published in China. Among them were the poems of his sister, Heo Nansolhyeon. In that sense, Heo Gyun may have been one of the first figures to introduce Korean literature to the outside world, something like a literary curator of his time. Heo Gyun may have possessed the brilliance of a great writer, yet perhaps he was not a careful strategist capable of overturning the world. Perhaps the contradictory judgments about him, traitor and revolutionary, are both true. To advocate equality in a rigid hierarchical society was itself both revolutionary and subversive. Even the fact that he was never rehabilitated during the Joseon dynasty, and that his authorship of the tale of Gildong became widely known only almost 3 centuries after his death, reflects how deeply his ideas challenged the existing order. Yet history does not always remain fixed in the judgments of its own time. In modern Korea, Heo Gyun has gradually come to be seen in a different light. Scholars began to re-evaluate his writings, his criticism of rigid social hierarchy, and his vision of a society in which talent mattered more than birth. Today, he is remembered not only as a condemned traitor of the court, but also as one of the most original thinkers of the late Joseon period, and the author of The Tale of Gildong. The man once condemned as a monstrous figure under heaven is now often seen as something else, a thinker who had simply arrived too early for his own time. More than 400 years later, Heo Gyun still remains officially branded as a traitor. And one question remains. Was he truly a traitor, or a thinker the world of Joseon was not ready for?